Okay guys, so we are joined today by Kacher, a nuclear physicist turned stock and crypto market trading wizard and best-selling author of How We Made 18,000% in the Stock Market. In addition to these colourful credentials, Chris's passion with blockchain is what we wanted to tap into today. Certainly we can learn a thing or two from how it poses to threaten the established order of governments and central banks as we see them today. Welcome Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here, Rob.
Well, thank you. Well, I've read some of your stuff and it really does coincide quite neatly with what Warren Buffett said recently in an interview that when it comes to cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, he said, unlike buying stocks, bonds or real estate, buying Bitcoin is not an investment. Now, do you really think that investors and speculators have missed the point when it comes to Bitcoin and it's really blockchain that they should invest their money in, if only they could?
Well, you know, when I hear quotes from some of these luminaries, sometimes I just have to chuckle because $1 invested in Bitcoin in 2009 would be worth almost $10 million today. And there's nothing in the history of speculation that even comes close. And I would argue, you know, isn't the point of investing to make money? So, you know, I find the statement a bit amusing coming from Buffett, but I find that a lot of these guys with the big accomplishments and, you know, they've been at what they've been doing for decades and they do it very well, or they're the leaders in their space. And I admire that very much. I mean, I admire Buffett in terms of his investment prowess. But these same guys often don't understand the brilliance behind blockchain and Bitcoin. I mean, Buffett self-professed to missing out on the entire dot-com boom in the 90s. And he continued to miss out on mega technology stock plays in the 2000s. And then he continues to miss out on brilliant strategies in today's world. And then we've got other guys like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, as well as the Wall Street Journal with countless numbers of quotes that have made, well, ludicrous proclamations against Bitcoin. I mean, the Wall Street Journal has, I mean, I could throw many quotes, but like some of the quotes are, there's no chance whatsoever that Bitcoin can displace the dollar for the simple reason that it's badly designed. Well, I mean, they obviously don't understand the mechanics behind Bitcoin because it's an evolving technology. It's not static. Or when the Wall Street Journal said that, it quoted JP Morgan's Dimon saying, Bitcoin's like the 17th century Dutch tulip mania, and it's probably worth zero. You know, I mean, they're just failing completely to realize the importance and connect the dots of what this technology is going to provide humanity and why it's so transformational. I mean, essentially, blockchain is the beating heart of Bitcoin. And as for whether other blockchain-related companies are superior to Bitcoin, remains to be seen. I mean, there are coins such as Litecoin, which is cheaper and faster than Bitcoin. But with these protocols, it doesn't matter which one is better. What matters is which one is being used the most.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, would you say, Bitcoin were on the scene first and is generally regarded as the gold of cryptocurrency. Do you think it will survive, or do you think it will be superseded very much in the same way that MySpace, once a giant in terms of social media, was eclipsed by Facebook, which came out of nowhere 10 years ago and then reduced MySpace to a mere obscurity? I mean, do you think the same may happen to Bitcoin, or will time will tell?
Well, I believe that Ethereum is evolving into the world's supercomputer, and that's a blockchain-based programming language enabling code-based contracts and decentralized apps to be built on it. But before we can say that, okay, Ethereum's going to be the winner, some of the listeners may remember when the internet was born, there were experts that said the internet would only be used for low latency, low bandwidth applications, and a lot of other predictions that never came true. And they even said that there would be many networks, not just one internet, but one internet for web, one for voice, one for video, and so on. And it made technical sense why they were saying that, but it never turned out that way. And what happened is TCP/IP, which had the first mover advantage, which was not superior, but the fact that it had the network effect became the backbone of the internet. And that has always dominated and is consequently used for everything, including voice, video, data, and so on. And analogously, I would say the same is true for technology in the crypto space. If a particular protocol has value in the crypto space, then odds are it'll eventually it'll become a mainstay. And a lot of these technologies would be built on the Bitcoin blockchain because Bitcoin is evolving such that it is going to morph into or enable companies to build on its blockchain, much as Ethereum already allows for. So it's while a crypto company might be built on EOS, there's Ethereum, there's Stellar, there's these other platform protocols. Bitcoin may end up being the ultimate winner, much as TCP/IP was for the internet. And given the metrics of hashing power and the number of users, number of transactions, Bitcoin's still the giant, and it may end up being the winner. But that said, it's certainly possible that Bitcoin could coexist with Ethereum and other major crypto platforms. It remains to be seen, and it's interesting to see the valuations. I mean, still Bitcoin is worth twice as much as the next coin in line, which is Ethereum. And it's still the giant, and it still seems to be maintaining its lead. I do believe over time, though, I mean, my gut says that I don't see why we can't have different technologies coexist among one another. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Bitcoin maybe be relegated to the champion store of value, which will probably keep it in the lead. But then you have other coins that serve different purposes, or that the killer app of Bitcoin, I believe, is its store of value, not its use as a method of exchange. And that method of exchange is really the last stage in the evolution of this technology. So when people say, "Oh, you can't even use Bitcoin to buy a sandwich yet," well, that's missing the point. It's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that Bitcoin has the value it has because it makes an exceptional store of value. And certainly in this day and age, with currencies being devalued and with fiat currencies really at a tipping point, a major tipping point, I think that Bitcoin is a perfect recipient of capital flow away from fiat and into more stable, really, when I say stable, I mean the ability to keep its value without being inflated away, and that would be Bitcoin.
Well, we're seeing a lot of big money flowing to Bitcoin, obviously, and it's no secret that cryptocurrency is threatening the established financial system. But, where central and high street banks are sidestep in favour of this unregulated instrument. But do you think governments will start shutting it down, given that it does challenge the status quo? Or do you think we are way past this point in its evolution?
Well, if 5,000 years of history are any guide, I'd say that governments have always controlled by initially reducing, then quashing productivity and freedom. Ed Seykota, the legendary futures trader, he detailed this very nicely in his book, Gavopoly in the 39th Day. Governments often target the younger demographic, especially those who are educated, much as Mao of China did during his reign of terror, as he felt that the younger demographic, the educated youth, stood the greatest chance of overthrowing his regime. Now, the brilliance behind blockchain is that governments in their current form are rendered obsolete as the technology eliminates the need for trusted third parties, or TTPs. And Raymond Kurzweil, who's the noted MIT academic and inventor and futurist, Kurzweil said that, and I believe roughly 9 out of 10 of his predictions he made in the early 90s have come true. But he said in a recent interview that he sees governments becoming in time like the typewriter. In other words, he doesn't see a violent collapse, but a fading away of the old guard, much as typewriters still exist, but their utility has dramatically diminished. And so I think that we have some really amazing transformational times ahead. And that's not to say, I don't want to come across as, governments haven't served a purpose. I think that the beauty about what lies ahead is that blockchain will allow existing governments to transform from where they are into a much higher and more efficient order in terms of the functions that they can fulfill. And that's to be said that a lot of the government functions are redundant and can be done much more efficiently with blockchain technology. So, in other words, government, that part of government will become like a typewriter. It really will become non-functional. But the choice parts of government that still serve a purpose will become much more highly ordered and efficient. Because we're not used to thinking of governments as being efficient, but the new form of government will be, and I think that will be to everybody's benefits. I wanted to just quickly mention that the way governments exist is that they fund themselves in three ways, and that's through taxes, that's through the issuance of bonds, and that's through printing money. And if the ability to print and debase currencies is minimized or eliminated, then governments will lose a major way of funding themselves, which means much smaller governments, or I'd rather say much more efficient governments.
Yeah, that's a good distinction there.
And it also means a much more honest government. That it would exist, say, only by taxation and borrowing, rather than printing money out of thin air, which is the greatest legalized Ponzi scheme ever created.
Oh, it's fabulous. A fantastic Ponzi scheme. Western capitalism, as we know it, is the biggest Ponzi scheme there ever is. Forget Bernie Madoff.
Precisely. And, when it comes to these financial matters, governments have always wanted to make total control of people's finance their focus. And that's how they ensure their survival, via taxation. Yet, the freedom, what I find interesting, is freedom of speech remains one of the cornerstones of a free society. But freedom of speech has been eroded, as where we sit today in today's world. And you could say that freedom of speech is a form of code that's being expressed by individuals. But now I would say that digital money is also a form of code expressed by individuals. And that would make speech, freedom of speech, and freedom of capital very similar. And it therefore would be contradictory that governments would try to restrict the flow of money, as they always have, yet at the same time try to uphold the freedom of speech. You can't have it both ways. And, I think the world's at many tipping points, and here's one of them, and that is that freedom of speech will, on the one side, you could have freedom of speech coming to an end, and governments having a staunch monopoly on all our words, thoughts, and actions, much as foreseen by George Orwell in Ayn Rand. But I think it's much more likely that that this surveillance state, where the governments have spent trillions of dollars on monitoring people's activities, I think that is going to become a shadow. It's going to take a big step backwards because of the blockchain technology, which decentralized power structures around the world. So the idea of dictatorships and the idea of governments that are disguised as democracies but are really actually oligarchies, in other words, ruled by the few, those forms of power structures will be diminished, they will be quashed, they will even be eliminated over time. And that will really empower the individual. I mean, we talked about in the 60s, they were always saying, power to the people. Well, yeah, you could have grassroots campaigns that achieve that for a moment, but what blockchain effectively does is it makes it the status quo. The status quo goes from corruption to an egalitarian system where the individual is truly empowered.
But how does this actually work in reality, though? I mean, a lot of people still think that blockchain is limited to Bitcoin and is essentially the driver. And a lot of people miss the point where it has the potential to undo government corruption, censorship, and privacy issues. How can this work in reality with blockchain?
Well, Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, he knew that governments and central banks are artificially constructed, trusted third-party monopolies. And that was the inspiration behind Bitcoin when he wrote in his notes that it said, quote, "I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party," unquote. And it's arguably the greatest invention in the history of humanity, not just because it propels these existing paradigms into a much higher order of efficiency, but because it frees people from the shackles of government. And it therefore comes as no surprise that the migration of top minds from their respective professions into the blockchain space well exceeds the migration witnessed during the internet boom in the 1990s. And currently, the blockchain space is still in its infancy. It's perhaps where the internet was in the mid 90s. So we have a huge period of stellar growth ahead. That's why, my $1 million, I've had a prediction of Bitcoin at $1 million by the year 2022. And I think that's kind of conservative, actually. And that's based on the price trajectory that Bitcoin has taken since 2009, and also on the fundamentals that are in place that are going to have dramatic effects on Bitcoin. I mean, there's so many huge tailwinds that are going to propel the value of Bitcoin, and I would say the whole blockchain space into the tens of trillions of dollars. I mean, right now the whole space is worth about 450 billion. So we're talking, at least 2 orders of magnitude in price improvement, I would say, over the next several years. So it's really an amazing time to be invested properly in the right coins. And I would also say that that Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, he understood that governments would always own the individual as long as TTP remained part of the structure. And centralized government control has always resulted in dictatorships in one form or another, and that they tend to enrich the few at the expense of the many. And as I said, these dictatorships are often disguised as democratic. But any economic justice has been really short-lived. Again, if 5,000 years of history is any guide.
Yeah.
And in today's world, there's outright theft through the central banking system. All these global central banks continue to print money at record levels. Governments use the excuse of too big to fail in their attempts to rationalize all this money printing. And
we've heard that before, too big to fail. We heard that with Enron, we've heard that with even Tesco's, and they failed. And as you say, 5,000 years of history has shown, even ever since the Romans and in more recent times, I guess Weimar Germany, that whenever fiat currency is printed en masse, it's a real rocky road to ruin. So it's fair to say that it's only really a matter of time until governments collapse under the weight of their ballooning national debts. But if they migrate over to blockchain or kind of implement blockchain within their existing structures, that could at least soften the blow. Would it be fair to say?
Well, I would say that's first. Here's the thing. What I find, is I like irony, and life is always full of delicious ironies. And,
it is, yeah.
As we were saying that, the central bank money printing, it's the biggest legalized Ponzi scheme ever. But meanwhile, Bitcoin is freeing humanity from corrupt governments while disguised as a Ponzi scheme. So I love that. I mean, everyone, a lot of these people like the Jamie Dimons and Nouriel Roubini's of the world, still think it's a Ponzi scheme or think it's a big bubble and it's purposeless. And I remember I had a couple discussions with Roubini in New York back in 2013 at these. He wants nothing to do with blockchain, but I was there for blockchain, and it's interesting that people get so wedded to their views, they're not even willing to listen to figure out or understand why this technology is valid. They're just so fixed in their beliefs, which is a shame. Yeah. But at any rate, fiat currency is essentially value by decree, meaning a government says that their fiat currency has value just because they say it does, and they'll say, well, it's backed by the full faith. Gotta love that, full faith and credit of the respective government. But with governments holding record levels of debt, which, by the way, make the levels of debt in the 1930s seem small by comparison, where is the credit? And so you're left with faith, basically. And meanwhile, you get these guys saying that that Bitcoin has no value because they don't understand the technology and the purpose of the blockchain itself. And that is why the space, the value of the space has gone from a tiny amount to where it stands right now, which is 450 billion. But it's just getting started. And I believe that blockchain may be the technology, it should be the technology that rescues the world from this insurmountable debt. Much as the internet eliminated borders for information flow, the blockchain is eliminating borders for innovation. So it's allowing people from all around the world to do things they never would have been able to do. And so it's no longer going to be people in Silicon Valley who have the greatest access to capital. Capital formation is changing in a way that you'll find anywhere in the world, no matter what country you're in, accessible to the masses. So the platform and the playing fields are dramatically changing from these mini oligarchies, Silicon Valley being one of them, to being spread out. And because of all this money printing going on, Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, with his exceptional track record, said recently in interviews that these fiat, these governments will have no choice but to eventually outright devalue their currencies, because all this money printing since 2009 hasn't jump-started the world economy. All these reports about GDP and GNP and low inflation, it's nonsense. It's doctored. If you look into the numbers, the hard facts of the reality, for instance, like take U.S. unemployment, it's at near record lows. But the reality is they fudge the numbers completely. I mean, they don't just fudge; they just outright lie. And a lot of the jobs being created are poverty-level jobs or temp jobs. And meanwhile, 60% of the U.S. is struggling, having serious financial struggles. 75% of the U.S. only has $1,000 in savings, so they don't have even enough to cover emergencies. The same is true in the U.K. And these are leading countries. And so there's a growing divide between the haves and have-nots. In fact, the top 1% of the world's richest now equal the bottom 90%. And that kind of divide has never occurred in history. So what's going to happen ultimately is this tipping point is going to tip, and there is going to be some sort of social unrest and revolt, and some sort of collapse, I think, is inevitable.
Well, it's a ticking time bomb, huh? I mean, I read a very stark article, actually, about the first European country to basically collapse. And the eyes are pointing to the United Kingdom for having so much toxic debt and having their banks basically completely taken on too much of this debt. But looking towards Singapore, it seems that a lot of people are flowing that way. I had a little conversation with Jim Rogers, actually, who, aside from blockchain and Bitcoin, are very enthusiastic about Southeast Asia actually being a region of prosperity compared to Europe, which is economically dead and has been ever since the 1990s. The only reason that it has sustained economic growth is thanks to the printing of the money, like we said. But I mean, with regards to investing in cryptocurrency, a lot of people think, okay, well, Bitcoin spiked to $20,000 before Christmas, and of course now it's at about today about $9,200 a coin. Is it too late to invest, would you say? Or is it never too late to invest?
It's at this juncture, like I was saying earlier, it's we're still it's like where the internet was in the mid-90s. Blockchain is still, say, a 3 or 4 year old child. I mean, it's going to grow into a giant, but we're still in like the first or second inning. That's on the basis of a number of metrics, actually. I'm just going to pull up, for instance, okay, in the dot-com boom, they had all these IPOs where money was being raised, and at the height of the dot-com boom in 1999, 24 billion was raised. Now, in the crypto boom, last year was the year of the start of all the launch of the massive numbers of ICOs, which are the equivalent of IPOs, and in 2017. I think something like 2 or 3 billion was raised. So that was not even 10% or barely 10% of what was raised at the height of the dot-com boom. So if you use that metric, you could say that the ICOs in crypto are just getting started. And also based on valuations, you've got companies like Binance, which is a centralized exchange for crypto trading. And in one quarter, it earned something like 200. It was a huge number. It earned more than Deutsche Bank in one quarter. And Deutsche Bank's market valuation is tens of billions of dollars. And meanwhile, Binance's valuation is only, I think, like $1 billion. So Binance has a huge way to go in terms of price appreciation. And in terms of also the disruptive potential is immense on these various technologies. I mean, Binance is a centralized exchange, but it's also building out a decentralized version, which is really the future of trading, because it's far more secure because you don't have a third party holding your coins anymore. You're in complete control. So with Binance making these type of moves, very disruptive moves, I think its valuation could easily be into the tens of billions over the next few years, which would represent potentially, a 50-fold or more gain from where it's currently traded.
Well, that's what we need at the moment. More exchanges where it's completely transparent. There are a lot of scams out there, unfortunately, like exchanges that set up, people buy coins and find out 5 weeks later that the exchange was a scam, that there were no coins. And I'm hearing these stories all over again, unfortunately. So I guess we're waiting for the dust to settle a bit. The scam artists will come and go, but ultimately there will be stability in this market space when it's all calmed down a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's like in the internet in the early days, there was a lot of bad actors and a lot of issues with leaving your credit card with a vendor, and that would be fitting into like kind of the mid '90s profile of the internet. But as it matured, of course, security measures like VeriSign made internet transactions quite safe, and the same should occur with the transaction of cryptocurrencies and the trading of them, and also in terms of the security of holding your coins on an exchange. If it's a decentralized exchange, then you don't have the operator running off with your coins, and if you have your, eventually there's going to be technologies where you could easily keep your coins in various wallets that have all sorts of protection mechanisms built in. But then trade them also. So right now it's cumbersome to have to move coins around and move them to safety and then to get them back onto the exchange. I mean, it's time consuming. It's not user friendly. But all that's going to get ironed out over the next, I would say over the next few years, because the development of the space is moving faster than anything I've ever seen in the history of technology. And that's really due to the massive migration of brilliant minds away from places like Silicon Valley and into the blockchain space.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what the future holds. And for those people who were cynical about blockchain, surely this interview will sway you otherwise. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I imagine a lot of people want to find out more information. Where can they find you?
You can go straight to selfishinvesting.com.
Great name. Love it.
Yeah, you can go. They can Google my name, Chris Kacher, Kacher, but selfishinvesting.com, and then you can also type in Crypto Corner into the report section, and that will display all the different Crypto Corner pieces that I've written today.
Outstanding. Okay, well, there you have it. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Rob. It's been great.